I'm recording this from a small rental flat just outside Manchester, 68 years old, and finally ready to admit something I never thought I'd say out loud. It started with an email. The subject line read, "Are you sure you know who she really is?" I almost deleted it without opening, but something in my gut told me to read, and what I saw inside, it hit me like a punch to the chest. It was from a man I'd never met. He said he'd been seeing Annika too, my Annika. He attached photos of her laughing beside him on a beach in Koh Lanta, her hand in his, the same way she used to hold mine. I stared at the screen, completely still. Numb. Betrayal doesn't come loud, it comes quiet, like a whisper you can't unhear. I'd given up everything for her. My home, my dignity. Even parts of myself I didn't know I was still holding on to. I thought I was wise, thought I understood people, thought I understood her, but I didn't, not even close. If you're watching this right now, maybe you've met someone too. Maybe she makes you feel seen again, wanted, young. Maybe you're thinking of giving up everything for her. Before you do, hear me out. Please hit the like button, drop a comment, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. And if you're one of those who keeps coming back for these confessions, super thank you. Your support keeps me going when the silence feels too loud. This story isn't about bitterness, it's about what love can blind us to, and how a second chance can sometimes cost you everything you have left. Let me take you back to where it all started. The sand was still warm under my bare feet as I watched Phelan dance in the waves. Her laugh carried across the water, pure and infectious, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 20 years. Joy. Real, unguarded joy. "Raymond, come here," she called, her voice bright against the sunset. "The water is perfect." I walked toward her, this beautiful 21-year-old who somehow chose to be with me. At 68, I'd given up on moments like this. My divorce had been finalized 3 years ago. My daughter hadn't spoken to me in longer than that. I'd accepted that my best years were behind me, that I'd spend whatever time I had left fixing mining equipment and eating dinner alone. But here was Phelan, splashing in the shallow water, looking at me like I mattered. "You're so serious," she said, wrapping her arms around my neck. "This is supposed to be a celebration." She was right. We were celebrating my visa extension, another 6 months in Thailand. 6 more months with her. "I've never been happier," I told her, and I meant it. She kissed me then, soft and warm, and I forgot about everything else. The age difference, the skeptical looks from other expats, the voice in my head that whispered this was too good to be true. "I want to build something real with you," she said. "Something that lasts." I held her close, breathing in her perfume mixed with sea salt. "So do I." That night, we sat on the beach drinking beer and talking about the future. She told me about her dreams of travel, of learning English perfectly, of maybe opening a small business someday. "You make me want to be better," she said, her head on my shoulder. "You make me feel safe." I stroked her hair, thick and black in the moonlight. "You saved me," I whispered. "I was just existing before I met you. You gave me my life back." She looked up at me with those dark eyes that seemed to see right through me. "This is your second life," she said. "Our life." I believed her completely. Sitting there with her warm body against mine, listening to the waves, I felt like the luckiest man alive. I was finally where I belonged. Finally, with someone who saw something worth loving in an old mining tech from London who'd lost everything once before. I didn't know then that I was about to lose everything again. But this time, it would be so much worse. I first saw Phelan at the immigration office in Bangkok 3 months earlier. I was drowning in paperwork, sweating through my shirt in the humid waiting room, completely lost. The forms were in Thai and English, but somehow I couldn't make sense of either version. "You look confused," she said in perfect English, appearing beside me with a gentle smile. "Can I help?" She was wearing a simple dress, professional but not expensive. Her English was better than most of the official staff, and she moved through the office like she owned it. "I'm Phelan. I work with visa applications. First time?" I nodded, feeling foolish. "Raymond. And yes, very first time. I have no idea what I'm doing." She laughed, not mockingly, but warmly. "Don't worry. Everyone feels this way the first time. Let me show you." She spent the next hour walking me through every form, explaining not just what to write, but why. She knew which windows to visit, which officers were helpful, which documents they'd actually check. "How do you know all this?" I asked as we waited in another line. "I help people," she said simply. "Foreigners mostly. People like you who are trying to start over somewhere new. Start over." That phrase hit me harder than it should have. After the papers were filed, I offered to buy her lunch. "You don't need to do that," she said. I was happy to help. "Please," I said. "It's the least I can do. And honestly, I'd like the company." We went to a small restaurant near the office. She ordered for both of us in rapid Thai, then turned back to me with curiosity. "What brought you to Thailand, Raymond?" I found myself telling her everything. The divorce that cost me half of everything I'd built. My daughter who blamed me for destroying the family. 25 years working in mining, good money, but nothing to show for it except an empty flat and a pension that barely covered rent. I needed somewhere I could afford to live, I said. Somewhere I could disappear. She listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, made me feel heard. "You're not disappearing," she said. "You're starting fresh. That takes courage." By the end of lunch, I felt lighter than I had in months. "Can I see you again?" I asked. "I mean professionally. I'll probably need help with the renewal process." She smiled. "Of course. But maybe next time we can skip the professional part and just have dinner." That first week, she helped me find a better apartment, set up a bank account, and navigate the maze of living as a foreigner in Bangkok. She was efficient and knowledgeable, but more than that, she was kind. She made me feel like I wasn't just another lost expat counting down his remaining years. "You're not like other men who come here," she told me one evening as we walked along the river. "You're respectful. You listen. You treat me like a person, not a stereotype." I took her hand. "Because you are a person. A remarkable person." She squeezed my fingers. I haven't felt this comfortable with someone in a long time. Neither had I. For the first time since my divorce, I slept through the night without waking up in a panic about money or loneliness or wasted years. Phelan made everything easier. She made me feel like maybe my story wasn't over yet. The first time I noticed something strange, we'd been together for 6 weeks. Phelan excused herself to take a phone call, speaking rapidly in Thai, her voice sharp and businesslike. When she came back, her phone was gone. "What happened to your phone?" I asked. She held up a different one, silver instead of black. "Oh, this one has better signal. I switch sometimes depending on where I am." It seemed reasonable enough. Thailand had multiple carriers, maybe she was being practical. But over the next few days, I realized she had at least 3 different phones, and she was always careful about which one she used when. "It's for work," she explained when I asked. "Different clients need different numbers. Privacy, you know?" I nodded, but something felt off. When we were together, she'd silence all of them, stack them face down on the table. "I want to focus on you," she'd say, but I started to wonder what she was hiding. Then there was the cousin incident. A young Thai man showed up at my apartment one afternoon while Phelan was there. He was maybe 25, well-dressed, with nervous energy. "This is my cousin Niran," Phelan said in Thai, then switched to English. "He wanted to meet you." Niran spoke no English, but he shook my hand and smiled too widely. They talked quietly in Thai for about 10 minutes while I sat there feeling like an outsider. After he left, I asked what that was about. "Family business," she said. "Nothing important." But Niran never came back. When I mentioned him weeks later, Phelan looked blank. "Cousin?" "Oh, right, Niran. He's busy with work, very busy." The way she said it made me think she'd forgotten she'd ever introduced us. I started paying attention to her stories about family. Her father was sometimes a farmer, sometimes a small business owner. She had 2 sisters, then 3, then 2 again. Her hometown changed depending on her mood. Chiang Mai, Phuket, sometimes a village I'd never heard of. Your family moves around a lot, I said one evening. She laughed. Thai families are complicated. People live everywhere, you know. Not like England where everyone stays in one place forever. She had a point. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe this was just cultural difference, and I was being paranoid. I don't want to be the suspicious foreign boyfriend, I told myself. I want to trust her. But late at night, when she thought I was asleep, I'd hear her texting on one of those phones. The soft ping of messages, the quick tapping of responses. Once I rolled over and saw the screen briefly, messages in Thai with what looked like numbers, $signs. Work never stops, she whispered when she saw me looking. She kissed my forehead. Go back to sleep, my love. I wanted to. I wanted to sleep and not question and not count the inconsistencies. Because when she held me, when she looked at me with those warm eyes and called me her love, everything else faded away. I told myself that everyone had secrets. Everyone had complicated pasts. What mattered was how she treated me, how she made me feel. And she made me feel alive. 3 months into our relationship, Phelan brought up marriage during dinner at our favorite restaurant. I've been thinking about us, she said, playing with her noodles, about our future. My heart jumped. At 68, I'd assumed marriage was behind me forever. What kind of thinking? She looked up with those serious eyes. Well, your visa situation would be much easier if we were married, and it would show my family that you're serious about me. I reached across the table and took her hand. I am serious about you. More serious than I've ever been about anyone. She smiled, but there was something careful about it. Marriage in Thailand isn't just about 2 people. It's about families. There are customs, expectations. Tell me about them. She explained dowry traditions, ceremonies, the importance of showing respect to elders. It all sounded reasonable, even romantic. A chance to do things properly, to honor her culture. How much are we talking about? I asked. For the dowry, I mean. It depends on many things. The families have to discuss it first, but there are also some background things I need to clear up on my side before we can start the formal process. She squeezed my hand. Nothing serious, just paperwork complications from when I helped other people with their visas. I need to show that everything I did was legitimate. This made sense to me. She'd helped dozens of foreigners navigate the system. Of course, there would be records to sort through, permissions to formalize. How much do you need for the background clearance? Maybe $15,000, just to make sure all the documentation is perfect before we submit anything official. $15,000. It was a significant chunk of my savings, but not impossible. And if it meant we could be together legally, permanently, it seemed like a good investment. Consider it done, I said. She leaned over and kissed me, deep and grateful. You're amazing, Raymond. I love you so much. That night she was more passionate than she'd been in weeks. She held me tight afterward, whispering about our future together. We're going to be so happy, she said. Just wait until you meet everyone properly. My whole family is going to love you. I transferred the money the next morning. Phelan cried when I showed her the confirmation, but they were happy tears. You don't know what this means to me, she said. What this means to us. For a few days, everything felt perfect again. She was attentive and affectionate, making plans for where we'd live after we were married, talking about trips we'd take together. I want to see London, she said. I want to meet your daughter, show her that you're happy. The mention of my daughter stung. Sarah hadn't returned my calls in over a year. The divorce had poisoned her against me, and moving to Thailand had only made things worse in her eyes. But maybe if she saw how happy Phelan made me, maybe she'd understand. I'd like that too, I said. I'd like them to meet you. Phelan was quiet for a moment. Family relationships are so important. When people don't support your happiness, it hurts everyone. She was right. I'd spent too much time worrying about what other people thought, what my daughter thought, what the other expats whispered about us. This was my life, my second chance. From now on, I said, we focus on us, on building something real together. She smiled and kissed me. I love that you're so sure about us. It makes me feel safe. But over the next few weeks, I noticed she was checking her phones more frequently. The background clearance was taking longer than expected. There were complications, more forms to file, additional fees that kept coming up. Bureaucracy, she sighed. Everything takes forever here. I sent another 5,000. Then 3,000 more when she said there was an urgent processing fee that couldn't wait. I hate asking you for money, she said, tears in her eyes. But I can't access my own accounts until this is resolved. The government froze them as part of the investigation. Investigation. That word made my stomach clench. What kind of investigation? Just routine. Because I helped so many people with visas, they want to make sure everything was legitimate. Which it was, of course, but you know how paranoid they can be about corruption. I believed her because I needed to, because the alternative was too devastating to consider. 6 weeks after I'd sent the first payment, Phelan came to my apartment in tears. Real tears. The kind that left her makeup streaked and her voice shaking. What's wrong? I asked, pulling her close. Tell me what happened. She couldn't speak for several minutes, just sobbed against my chest while I held her and waited. Finally, she pulled back and looked at me with desperate eyes. My family is in trouble. Real trouble, she explained between ragged breaths. Her father had borrowed money from the wrong people to expand his business. Local crime figures who didn't accept late payments. They came to the house yesterday. They gave him 1 week to pay everything back with interest. $50,000. My blood went cold. What happens if he can't pay? I don't know. They didn't say exactly, but the way they looked at my mother and my little sister, she started crying again. Raymond, I'm so scared. I'd never seen her this frightened, this vulnerable. The confident woman who navigated government offices and managed visa paperwork was gone, replaced by a terrified daughter who couldn't protect her family. How much does he have? Maybe 10,000. He's been trying to sell equipment, anything he can, but it's not enough. And there's not enough time. She looked up at me with those dark eyes full of hope and desperation. Would you help us? Would you loan us the money? I know it's a huge amount, and I know we're not even married yet, but I don't know who else to turn to. $50,000. It was more than half my total savings, money I'd planned to live on for the next several years. But looking at her tear-stained face, thinking about her family in danger, the choice seemed obvious. Of course I'll help, I said without hesitation. We'll figure out the repayment later. Right now, your family needs to be safe. Relief flooded her features. Are you sure? It's so much money. I'm sure. We're building a life together. Your family is going to be my family. We protect each other. She threw her arms around me, holding me so tight I could barely breathe. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You just saved their lives. The next morning I wired the money to an account she provided. $50,000 transferred in less than 5 minutes. Phelan stood beside me at the bank, her hand on my shoulder as I signed the forms. I'll never forget this, she whispered. Neither will my family. You're a hero, Raymond. But something shifted after that. Something subtle that I couldn't quite identify at first. Her kisses felt different, more perfunctory. When we made love, she seemed distant, like she was thinking about something else. Is everything okay? I asked one evening after she'd barely touched her dinner. You seem worried. I'm just tired, she said. It's been a stressful time with my family and the visa paperwork and everything. That made sense. Of course, she was exhausted after everything that had happened. I tried to be patient, to give her space to process. but the warmth between us had changed. The easy intimacy we'd shared felt forced now, like she was performing rather than feeling. Maybe we should take a little vacation, I suggested. Get away from Bangkok for a few days, let you relax. She looked at me like I'd suggested something unreasonable. I can't leave right now. My family might need me. And the visa situation is at a critical point. There was always something, always a reason we couldn't quite get back to how things were before. I told myself it was temporary stress, that once everything was resolved, we'd find our way back to each other. But late at night, staring at the ceiling while she slept beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The woman I'd fallen in love with was slipping away, and I didn't understand why. Phelan started disappearing. Not physically at first, but emotionally. She'd be sitting right next to me, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. "Are you happy with me?" I asked one night after she'd spent an entire dinner scrolling through one of her phones. She looked up, startled. "What? Of course I'm happy. Why would you ask that?" "You seem distant lately, like you're not really here when we're together." Her face hardened. "I have a lot going on, Raymond. My family situation, work pressures, visa complications. I can't just focus on romance all the time." The word romance came out like an accusation, like I was being frivolous for wanting her attention. "I understand you're stressed. I just miss feeling connected to you." "Connected," she repeated flatly. "What does that even mean? I'm here, aren't I? I sleep in your bed. I eat your food. What more do you want from me?" The coldness in her voice stunned me. "I want you to talk to me, to look at me when I'm speaking, to act like you care that I'm here." She slammed her phone down. "You want to control me, that's what this is about. You think because you gave me money, you own me. That's not what I meant at all. The money was to help your family. It had nothing to do with us." "Everything has to do with everything, Raymond. You're so naive about how the world works." Then she was gone. Not just from the conversation, but from the apartment. She grabbed her purse and walked out without another word, leaving me sitting alone at the dinner table wondering what had just happened. She didn't come back that night. Or the next night. When she finally returned, she had an explanation ready. "I stayed with my sister. I needed space to think." "Think about what?" "About whether this relationship is working for either of us." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "You're possessive, Raymond. You want to monitor my every move, control who I talk to, manage my emotions. That's not love. That's ownership." I tried to defend myself, to explain that I just wanted us to be close again, but every word seemed to make it worse. She listened with a bored expression, like I was a child having a tantrum. "Fine," she said finally. "I'll try to be more present, but you need to give me room to breathe." For the next few weeks, she made an effort. She put her phones away during dinner, asked about my day, initiated physical intimacy, but it felt rehearsed, like she was following a script. The spontaneous laughter, the genuine curiosity about my thoughts, the way she used to light up when I walked into a room, all of it was gone. Then I saw the message. She was in the shower, and her phone, the silver one, was buzzing on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a text preview in Thai, but I caught two English words that made my blood freeze: full amount. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding. The message disappeared, but those two words burned in my memory. Full amount. Like a payment had been received, like a transaction had been completed. When Phelan came out of the bathroom, I was still standing by the nightstand. "Everything okay?" she asked, toweling her hair. "Your phone was buzzing." I didn't read the message, but I couldn't help seeing it light up. She glanced at the phone, her expression neutral. Probably just work stuff. But she picked it up immediately and walked to the other room to check it, taking the phone with her. That night, I lay awake listening to her breathe beside me. She felt like a stranger in my bed, someone wearing Phelan's face but lacking her soul. I wanted to ask about the message, about what full amount meant, about why everything had changed so dramatically after I'd sent the money to help her family. But I was terrified of the answers I might get. "My family wants to meet you properly," Phelan announced one morning over coffee. Her tone was casual, but there was something calculated about the timing. We'd been walking on eggshells for weeks, ever since the night she disappeared. "I'd love to meet them," I said, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. "When?" "This weekend. They're having a gathering at my aunt's house. It's perfect timing because some relatives are visiting from up north." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You'll need to bring something. Money, I mean. It's traditional to show respect to the elders with a gift." "How much?" "A few thousand should be appropriate. Maybe 5,000. Nothing too flashy, but enough to show you understand the customs. $5,000 as a meeting gift." It seemed excessive, but I didn't want to embarrass her by showing up empty-handed. "Of course. Whatever's appropriate." The house was in a neighborhood I'd never been to before, down narrow streets that got progressively more run down. But the house itself was nice, well-maintained, with a neat garden and expensive cars in the driveway. Phelan's family was already assembled when we arrived. Parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, maybe 15 people total. They greeted me with warm smiles and respectful ways, but there was something performative about it all. "This is Raymond," Phelan announced in English, then repeated it in Thai. "The man I told you about." Her mother, a thin woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward and took my hands. "Welcome," she said in careful English. "We are so happy to meet you." The father was more reserved, nodding politely but saying nothing. He looked me up and down with the expression of someone evaluating livestock. We sat in the main room, and they served tea and snacks while making polite conversation. They asked about London, about my work, about my family. I answered as best I could while Phelan translated back and forth. "They like you," she whispered to me during a lull in conversation. "My mother thinks you have a kind face." But something felt off about the whole scene. The questions were too practiced, like they'd been rehearsed. And everyone kept looking at Phelan for cues, waiting to see how she wanted them to respond. After about an hour, the mother brought up the subject I'd been dreading. "Phelan tells us you want to marry," she said in English, smiling widely. "This makes us very happy. But there are traditions to follow." She explained the dowry system, the ceremonies that would be required, the various expenses involved. It all sounded reasonable until she got to the numbers. For a girl like Phelan, with education and good family, the appropriate amount would be maybe $100,000. But because you are older, and this is second marriage for you, we can discuss maybe $75,000. On top of the $23,000 I'd already sent for visa paperwork and the $50,000 for her father's debt, they were asking for another $75,000. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but the room suddenly felt very small. "That's a significant amount," I said carefully. "I'd need to think about it." The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. The mother's smile tightened. Of course. But in our culture, when a man loves a woman, he shows it with actions, not just words. I understand, and I do love Phelan very much. I just need to consider my finances." After that, the conversation became strained. They were still polite, but the warmth had evaporated. When we left an hour later, I felt like I'd failed some kind of test. In the car, Phelan was silent and tense. "You embarrassed me," she said finally. "How?" "By hesitating, by making it seem like I'm not worth the investment. That's not what I was doing. $75,000 is a lot of money. I need to make sure I can afford it without putting us both at risk financially." She turned to look at me, and there was something cold in her eyes I'd never seen before. "You spent $50,000 to help my father without even thinking about it. But when it comes to marrying me, suddenly you need to consider your finances? That was an emergency. This is different. This is exactly the same. This is about whether you really want to be part of this family or whether you just want to keep me as your convenient girlfriend." She didn't speak to me for the rest of the drive. That night, she didn't come to bed. I found her sleeping on the couch in the morning, fully dressed. "Phelan, can we talk about this?" "There's nothing to talk about," she said without looking at me. "You've made your position very clear." She left the apartment and didn't come back for 3 days. Marcus, an Australian expat I'd met at the coffee shop, seemed nervous when he approached my table. "Raymond, mate, I need to show you something." "I don't want to, but I think you should know." He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was taken at a beach resort, maybe Pattaya or Hua Hin. Phelan was in the center wearing a bikini I'd never seen, laughing with her arms around a man I didn't recognize. He was younger than me, maybe 45, with the confident posture of someone who had money. "When was this taken?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Last weekend. My mate Dave was there for a conference. He recognized her from when I pointed her out to him before. Last weekend, when she'd told me she was visiting her sick grandmother in the countryside, when she'd been too busy to answer my calls." "Are you sure it's her?" Marcus nodded sadly. "I'm sorry, mate, I really am, but I thought you should know." I stared at the photo until the image burned into my retinas. The way she was holding him was intimate, familiar. The way she was smiling at the camera was the same way she used to smile at me. "There's more," Marcus said gently. "Dave said they were there together for 3 days, acting like a couple. She introduced him as her boyfriend." The words hit me like a physical blow. I handed the phone back because I couldn't look anymore. "Thanks for telling me," I managed. "I know it wasn't easy." That evening, I waited for Phelan to come home. She arrived around 9, cheerful and affectionate in a way she hadn't been in weeks. "How was your day, my love?" she asked, kissing my cheek. "Good. How was your grandmother?" "Much better. The medicine is helping." She moved around the apartment easily, making tea, asking about my plans for tomorrow, behaving exactly like someone who'd spent the weekend caring for a sick relative. "Phelan, I need to ask you something." Something in my tone made her stop and look at me. "What is it? Were you really with your grandmother last weekend?" Her expression didn't change. "Of course I was. Why would you ask that?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo Marcus had sent me. She looked at it for a long moment, then handed the phone back. "So?" The casual response stunned me. "So? That's all you have to say?" "What do you want me to say, Raymond?" "Yes, I was at the beach. With a friend. Is that a crime? You told me you were taking care of your sick grandmother." "I was. On Sunday. Saturday, I went to the beach. I'm not required to report every moment of my life to you." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost believed her. Almost. "Who is he, Phelan?" "A friend. Someone I've known for a while." "What kind of friend?" Her eyes flashed with annoyance. "The kind who doesn't interrogate me about every photo, every phone call, every decision I make." "I'm not interrogating you. I'm asking my girlfriend why she's at a beach resort with another man, lying about where she was." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Girlfriend? Is that what I am? Because lately it feels more like I'm your employee or your possession." "That's not true." "Isn't it? You track my movements, question my family, control my finances. You think because you gave me money, you own me." "I gave you money to help your family, to help us get married." "No," she said quietly. "You gave me money because you were lonely and desperate and you thought you could buy someone young and beautiful to make you feel important again." The words cut deeper than anything she'd ever said to me. "That's not why I love you." "Love?" She shook her head. "You don't love me, Raymond. You love the idea of me, the fantasy of me. You love feeling like a generous older man saving a poor young girl, but you don't actually know me at all. Then tell me who you are. Help me understand." She studied my face for a long moment, and I saw something like pity in her eyes. "You want to know who I am? I'm someone who takes care of herself. I'm someone who doesn't put all her eggs in one basket. I'm someone who understands that security comes from options, not from depending on one person. What does that mean? It means you were never the only one, Raymond. You were just the one who paid the most. The room went completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel my hands shaking. How many others are there? Does it matter? It matters to me. 3, sometimes 4. Depends on who's in town, who needs help with visas, who's feeling generous. She said it matter-of-factly, like she was discussing the weather. The whole time we've been together? The whole time. I sank onto the couch trying to process what I was hearing. The family debt, the visa problems, the dowry requests. Were any of those real? Some of them. The money gets pooled, distributed where it's needed. My father did have debts, but not to criminals. To other expats who were smart enough to diversify their investments. Investments. That's all this ever was, Raymond. A business arrangement. You got companionship, regular sex, someone to make you feel valued. I got security, support, help with my family. Everyone got what they needed. I thought you loved me. I liked you. I still like you. You're kinder than most of the men I work with. But love? No, I don't love any of you. She picked up her purse and headed toward the door. Where are you going? Out. Don't wait up. Are you coming back? She paused with her hand on the doorknob. That depends on whether you can accept reality. I'm not going anywhere, but this fantasy relationship you've created in your head, that's over. If you want to keep seeing me, we do it on my terms. No more possessiveness, no more questions about my other activities. No more pretending this is some great romance. And if I can't accept that, then you should also know that I have records of every payment you've made. Financial support that could be interpreted as paying for services. Immigration authorities take that kind of thing very seriously. The threat was delivered calmly, professionally. Are you blackmailing me? I'm explaining your options. You can be a mature adult who understands how the world works, or you can be a problem that needs to be managed. Your choice. She left, and I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the walls that suddenly felt like a prison. Everything I'd believed about the past 9 months was a lie. Everything I'd felt was real had been performance. I'd paid nearly $150 for the privilege of being deceived by someone I'd thought loved me. I moved out of the apartment the next week, found a small guest house near the river where the owner, an elderly Thai woman, didn't ask questions and accepted cash payments. Mrs. Kamal Siraporn brought me tea in the mornings and left me alone with my shame. The first few days were the worst. I'd wake up reaching for Phelan, forgetting for those crucial seconds between sleep and consciousness that she was never really there. The phantom weight of her body beside me, the imagined sound of her breathing, the muscle memory of stroking her hair, all of it mocking me now. I deleted most of her photos from my phone, but I kept one. The picture from our first weekend together, when we'd gone to the floating market and she'd laughed at my clumsy attempts to bargain with the vendors. Her smile in that photo looked genuine, unguarded. Maybe it was, or maybe I was still fooling myself. Maybe she'd been practicing that smile for years. I found myself analyzing every memory, dissecting every conversation we'd ever had, looking for clues I'd missed. The phone switching should have been obvious. The inconsistent family stories should have raised red flags immediately. The way she'd deflected every question about her past, turned every inquiry back to my feelings, my needs, my loneliness. She'd read me like a book from day one. Lonely, divorced man, desperate for validation, carrying enough guilt about his failed marriage to be grateful for any attention. I was a textbook mark, and she'd played me perfectly. But what haunted me most wasn't the money or even the lies. It was remembering how good it had felt to believe I was loved. Those months when I'd wake up excited about the day because I'd get to see her, when I'd catch myself smiling for no reason except that someone beautiful and young had chosen to be with me, when I'd felt like maybe my story wasn't just about failure and regret. You have to forgive yourself. Mrs. Siraporn told me one morning as she watered her plants. Bad things happen to good people. Doesn't make you stupid, makes you human. I wanted to believe her, but the evidence suggested otherwise. How could I have been so blind? How could I have ignored so many warning signs? How could a man who'd worked in technical fields his whole life, who prided himself on logical thinking, fall for something so obvious? The answer was simple and humiliating. Because I'd wanted to. Because being desired by someone like Phelan had felt like winning the lottery. Because at 68, I'd thought this might be my last chance at happiness, and I'd been willing to pay any price to keep it. I started writing. Not a journal, not a memoir, just letters to men like me. Men who might be sitting in bars in Bangkok or Manila or Bogota, buying drinks for women young enough to be their daughters, feeling like they'd finally found someone who understood them. Dear fellow fool, I'd begin, then spend hours trying to find words that might save someone else from making my mistakes. But how do you warn someone against their own desperate need to be loved? How do you explain that the very thing that feels most real, that rush of being chosen, being needed, being appreciated, is often the most carefully constructed illusion? I wrote about the phones, the inconsistent stories, the way she'd made me feel guilty for asking questions. I wrote about the slow escalation of financial requests, each one reasonable by itself, adding up to financial devastation. I wrote about the family meeting that felt like a performance, the dowry demands that had no basis in actual tradition. Most importantly, I wrote about the moment I knew for certain it was over, not when I saw the photo, not even when she admitted to the other men, but when she looked at me with pity and explained that I'd been buying a service, not building a relationship. The hardest part, I wrote, isn't losing the money. It isn't even losing her. It's losing the version of yourself you thought you'd become. The man who was worthy of love, who'd learned from his past mistakes, who'd finally found his place in the world, that man never existed. He was just another character in her performance. I sealed the letters in envelopes I'd never send and kept them in a drawer with the last photo of her smiling face. Evidence of my capacity for self-deception, preserved like pressed flowers from a relationship that had bloomed only in my imagination. 6 months after I moved out, Phelan sent me a message, just one line. Hope you are well. I stared at that message for 20 minutes, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to respond, to ask how she was, to tell her I missed her laugh, even though I knew it had probably been calculated too. Part of me wanted to unleash months of anger, to call her every name I'd whispered to myself in the dark hours after she'd left. Instead, I deleted the message without responding. That night, I took out all her photos. Not just the one I'd kept, but screenshots I'd forgotten about, pictures other people had taken of us together, even the banking receipts that showed her name. I sat on my narrow bed in the guest house and looked through them all one more time. There she was at the floating market, feeding me mango slices with her fingers. There we were at the temple, her head on my shoulder as we watched the sunset. There she was dancing at that little bar where the owner knew our names, spinning in her yellow dress while I clapped off rhythm and grinned like an idiot. In every photo, I looked happy. Genuinely, completely happy in a way I hadn't been before I met her and haven't been since. Whatever else she'd taken from me, she'd given me that. Months of feeling like I mattered to someone, like I was building something meaningful, like my life had purpose beyond just passing time until I died. Maybe that was worth $150. Maybe it wasn't, but it was what I'd paid, and dwelling on the transaction wouldn't change the balance sheet. I deleted every photo. Then I deleted her contact information. Then I blocked her number on all my phones. It felt like performing surgery on myself, cutting away parts that still functioned but were infected beyond saving. The next morning, I called my bank and arranged to transfer money back to London. Not all of it. I still needed to live, but enough to repay the friend who'd lent me the deposit on my Bangkok apartment, enough to cover some debts I'd been ignoring. Small steps toward rebuilding the financial stability I'd traded for love that was never real. I also drafted an email to my daughter Sarah. Just a few lines acknowledging that I'd made mistakes, that I'd been absent when she needed me, that I understood why she was angry. I didn't send it immediately. It felt too much like trying to buy forgiveness, but I saved it in my drafts folder where I could see it every time I opened my email. A reminder that some relationships might still be salvageable if I was willing to do the work without expecting immediate returns. Mrs. Siraporn noticed the change in me. "You seem lighter," she said one morning as she brought me coffee, "like you put down something heavy." She was right. For months, I'd been carrying the weight of trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to find a version of events where I wasn't completely foolish, where Phelan had felt something real for me, where the whole experience hadn't been a waste. But there was freedom in accepting the simple truth. I'd been lonely and vulnerable, and someone had exploited that. It didn't make me special or stupid or cursed. It made me human. That afternoon, I walked down to the river and found a small restaurant where I'd never been before. The owner, a middle-aged Thai woman, greeted me with genuine warmth and recommended the fish curry. I ordered it along with a beer and sat watching the boats drift past while I ate. The curry was excellent. The beer was cold. The sunset painted the water gold and orange. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. For the first time in almost a year, I was present in my own life instead of living in the fantasy of someone else's performance. A young Western man at the next table was showing photos to his Thai girlfriend, talking excitedly about places they'd visit together, promises they'd make to each other. She listened with bright attention, asking the right questions, laughing at his jokes. Maybe their relationship was genuine. Maybe they'd build something real together. Or maybe I was watching another performance, another transaction disguised as romance. Either way, it wasn't my story anymore. I finished my meal, left a generous tip, and walked home through the Bangkok streets that had once felt foreign and now just felt like streets. I had enough money to live simply for several more years. I had my health, my skills, my memories of genuinely good times, even if they'd been built on false foundations. I had the possibility of reconnecting with my daughter, of making new friends, of finding purpose that didn't depend on being desired by someone half my age. Most importantly, I had the knowledge that I could survive having my heart broken at 68, that I could face the complete destruction of my self-image and still wake up the next morning. That love might be a lie, but the capacity to love, even foolishly, even desperately, was still something valuable inside me. Back in my room, I took out a piece of paper and wrote one final letter, not to other potential victims, but to myself. "You survived," I wrote. "You learned. You're free now to make better choices, not because you're smarter or stronger, but because you've paid the price for wisdom. Use it well." I sealed that letter too, but this one I addressed and mailed to my London flat, where it would be waiting whenever I decided to go home. A message from the man who'd lost everything to the man who might someday find something better. That night, I slept through until morning for the first time in months. No dreams of Phelan dancing in the waves, no nightmares about bank transfers and broken promises, just deep, peaceful sleep and the sound of the river flowing past my window toward the sea.